Good morning. On May the 25th, 2020, we all witnessed the death of Mr. George Floyd, and soon after, the nation called for a change within the law enforcement community. Chief Ken Albano, then the president of the Florida Police Chiefs Association, the third largest association in the United States, and speak on behalf of over 900 members, acted. And that's what a leader does. A leader takes action. On June the 17th in 2020, Chief Albano formed a new subcommittee on accountability and societal change. Thank you, Chief Albano. Chief Jeff Pearson was elected as president in 2020 and continued with the subcommittee. The committee was tasked with leading the way for constructive change and rebuilding trust and accountability between law enforcement and the community they serve. In September of 2020, the subcommittee, composed of 11 law enforcement executives and 11 community leaders from across Florida, issued its first report on use of force and related issues. This report helped develop and pass for the House Bill 7051 relating to law enforcement practice that passed during the 2021 Florida legislation session. I'd also like to give a special thanks out to Amy Mercer, who was then the executive director, and now Jennifer Pruitt, who is now the executive director for the Florida Police Chiefs Association. The subcommittee then focused on reviewing the 6 main pillars identified in the 2015 final report of the President Task Force on 21st Century Policing, prepared by the Federal Office of Community Policing, or prepared by the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services. Those 6 pillars are building trust and legitimacy, policy and oversight, technology and social media community, policing and crime reduction, training and education, officer wellness and safety. These recommendations were approved by the Florida Police Chiefs Association Board of Directors and now are available to every police department, whether they're small, medium, or large-size agency, so that these agencies can act as one on the same sheet of music in the state of Florida. These are difficult issues and sometimes difficult conversations, but the subcommittee work is an example that progress and success is possible, especially at the local level. The Florida Police Chief's recommendations that local law enforcement agencies and their community use this document to engage and expand this conversation. As one of the committee members said, Dr. Nelson, it should not be this or that, it should be this and that. Law enforcement and community leaders on this subcommittee, as well as the Florida Police Chiefs members, welcome reform measures that are factual and balanced, ever mindful of the dedication and sacrifice of law enforcement officers, but equally committed to public safety and accountability. And again, I just want to thank all the law enforcement executives that are on this committee. Especially want to thank our community leaders that were on this committee, because they opened our eyes up, but they really showed us that if we listen and have that conversation, that difficult conversation, that we all want the same thing, a safe community. And with that, I'm going to ask Chief Albano to come up to talk about what he started. Chief?
Well, thank you, Tony. We have had, for years, principles of law enforcement interaction with our community. They go back as far as, to my recollection, I was taught in the academy, 1829, the principles that Sir Robert Peel established for law enforcement to be successful within communities. And the 7th of those was that law enforcement was from the community, and the community was law enforcement. There is no separation, and there cannot be a separation if we are truly to be successful at achieving our ultimate goal, which Chief Holloway just mentioned. After the tragedy in Minneapolis, I reached out to my good friend, Chief Holloway, and I shared my heart with him about what I hope to establish with this subcommittee, and I asked him, for it to be successful, it has to be community-driven, and it has to have a good chair. Will you take that on for me? And he agreed. From there, it was all about getting the community members together that could speak and have those tough conversations, and there were some tough conversations. But this report and the one that preceded it from this subcommittee is community-driven. This is not the end, but a beginning. This is not the solution, but a step in the right direction. We must work and continue to work together through the works of our subcommittee, its members, and our communities to continue to foster communications, to continue to foster good conversations, even though they're tough sometimes. And most importantly, to be able to establish and maintain the trust between our communities and their law enforcement officers. So I really thank you for taking the time, because your involvement in everything we do is so important. The media being able to share the success of this subcommittee and continuing to work with us in purpose to bring our communities together is going to be critical if we are ever to truly be successful in our endeavor. So thank you for being here, and Tony, thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Chief, and I appreciate that. Next, I'm going to ask Mr. Watson Haynes to come up. Before he comes up, though, I just want to bring to my right, you can see we have our law enforcement executive team here throughout the state or the Tampa Bay area. And this committee did what we asked them to do. We asked each chief to go out and say, if you were selected for the subcommittee, to find someone in your community that's willing to work both sides. Tell what law enforcement is doing wrong, tell what the community is doing wrong or right, and what can we do together to develop this. So with that, Mr. Reverend Watson Haynes, please.
Let me first of all thank the committee. This was not an easy task. I spend my days trying to make hard decisions. This was a hard decision because we all had to take off our own feelings about things and look out for the interests of the community and the police. And I thank Chief Holloway, because when he called me, I was like, I am not interested in another committee. But then I said, it's okay, it'll last for about a couple of months, it'll be over. No, it's been over a year. But the committee really looked hard at things like, how do we protect the community, and how do we protect the lives of police officers? You know, we're taxpayers, and when those officers do good things, we pay for it. When they do bad things, we also pay for it. And so we don't want to be on the other end of a police officer who does something wrong and not understand that we as citizens have a responsibility for what that police officer does. And so we want to protect our officers. We want them to go home to their families. We also want to protect the citizen and make sure that they go home. And so this task force has really come up with some phenomenal things. We were wordsmithing things to the point that we understood exactly what we were saying about our police and how we need to look out for the community. And so I commend Chief Holloway, not for appointing me, but for taking the leadership with this committee to open up and listen to what we had to say, and then we had to listen to what the police officers had to say. And we came up with one document, not two documents, but one document to guide the principles of this committee. And so once again, I thank this committee here, and certainly thank the statewide committee for putting in the time and effort to do the right thing. And so thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief, for having the confidence in all of us who served on the committee.
So again, I just want to thank everybody that sat on the subcommittee and dedicated their time to this. It couldn't be done without this committee. And with that, open up for any questions, because again, the committee did a lot of good work on this.
Chief, are things changing within your department via the things and ideas that they came up with directly? How will it affect you guys?
One of the things, we looked at the programs that we've got started, and then what can we do more, what more community involvement we can get involved in. I'll give you one good example is now that we have our young officers, they now go to a museum, the Carter G. Woodson Museum. They spend a day at the museum learning about the area that they're going to patrol in. So it started there. Then we bring in the community, have that community conversation. because they also sometimes don't get a chance to see the nice people, because when they're calling for a crisis. Let's get to know the other 98% of the community so we can start building on that. And I think any other chief may want to add on to that, but I think everybody else has something. Chief Slaughter, Chief Delgado, anyone?
So the question is, how have we changed or adapted based on this? I think, oh, thank you. I just got used to taking it off and putting it on. I think this committee changed all of us in many ways. It's just leaders to start off, basically. During the conversations that we had, I was extremely inspired by the openness and the frankness of the community leaders. I'd like to thank Marilyn Turman, who's here today, who is from Clearwater and was representing the Clearwater residents. There was a tremendous amount of empathy and concern from the community members about the police officers, and I'll be honest with you, that was a tremendously huge surprise. I thought going into it, it was going to be a very critical, breakdown of law enforcement, and there was that, but there was also a tremendous amount of respect for the job that they had to do and wanting to make sure that they were supported when they did it right and held accountable when they did it wrong. And I thought that that was just very grateful for that. I think coming out of the action items, and there are many on there, my intent or my belief on how this is to be used by each community is they use it as a roadmap and sit down with their community now and just do a self-assessment on yourselves and the police department and the community, and what are we doing good as a community and what are we doing bad as a community, what are we doing bad as a police department, and what are we doing good as a police department, and see where we may need to individually improve, because each community is going to be a little different. I think from Clearwater's standpoint, we wanted to invest in the concept of making officers feel comfortable stepping forward when they saw misconduct. So we invested in active bystander for law enforcement training, which was one of the encouragement for the officers to step forward and take responsibility and to have those kind of opportunities to interact with when they see misconduct in a productive way. The peer review was something that was discussed. I believe that peer review is something that law enforcement can do a much better job on. The airline industry does it. The medical community does it. There's no reason why we can't look at what we've done and what our experiences have been, especially with the use of body-worn camera footage that we have access to now, and looking at that film like we're the offensive line for the Buccaneers, making ourselves better every day by looking at what we have done. We can do better, not in a punitive, in a continuing. I don't like the word reform. I think reform implies that every now and then you kind of make some changes to get better. Law enforcement, I think, is about being in a state of continual improvement, and I think that really was driven home to me from this committee. I think there is a great desire for many people in the community and chiefs to have a good engagement conversation. Let's have a conversation, let's talk, and then you get everybody in your room and you don't know where to go with it. I think this helps those groups go in a direction that's going to be positive and productive for the community. And I want to say that I'm thankful for Chief Albano for putting this committee together, and Chief Holloway, it's always great to serve underneath your leadership again. So thank you for letting me get involved, and thank you to the community members for your frank and honest, open conversations and for making me a better chief. Thank you.
Chief, I don't know if you want to answer this or any of you want to. Where were we a year ago? Where are we now? And where do we need to be a year from now?
I'll speak for myself here. A year ago, I would say we were probably back on our heels trying to defend everything that we were doing, and every police department here was doing a great job. Now, I want to say we're leaning forward. We're showing the community all the things that we have been doing. People say, well, why don't you do this program? Well, we have that. Well, why don't you have this policy? We have that. So through this committee and through everything, it's like, okay, let's show everybody what we have. And then just like Chief Slaughter said, and what we talked with Chief Dugan is that, okay, let's show what we have and how do we improve on that? Because you can always improve. If you ever think, oh, this is it, then you're going to fall behind. I think Mr. Kareem said it best when he says, this is always evolving. And every day you wake up, you better come up with something else, because there's something that's going to change tomorrow, and you and the community better be working together on that. So this job has changes, and we're always evolving something better.
And you and I had a conversation the other day about, the increased violence that we've seen in recent weeks in fact that it's arguments. Is there anything more that can be done from a law enforcement standpoint that can let the community know that we're here, that we're here for you?
I think we're doing it now, just like Mr. Haynes, just having these community meetings, sitting down and talking to the different groups. I only can speak for St. Pete. I can tell you the communities that I'm speaking to, they're asking those questions. What else can we do to make it better? What other message can we get out there? Because that's what it is. What message can we do? Law enforcement can't do it all, but together, law enforcement community, we can do a lot. And that's what we gotta do. And going back to Dr. Nelson. It's not us versus them. It should be we solving the problem, not what is the police department doing wrong? What is the community doing wrong? Let's sit at that table and what are we doing right? Let's fix that. And how can we move forward together, making our community continue to be safe?
Are there things that residents in the cities where this is all going on will actually be able to observe? Because a lot of times people don't believe it until they see it. Are there things that they'll observe that changes for the better?
I'll ask one of our communities that want to answer that one. They were involved in that because they're going to be involved. Anybody want to handle that one? Kareem?
Good morning, Kareem Spratling. I am a resident of Pinellas and Hillsborough County, and I was honored to be appointed to the committee by Chief Dugan. First of all, I again want to thank the chief. I want to thank all the chiefs for the honest and open conversation. I want to thank Chief Dugan for appointing me to the committee. I think it's very important to note that I was appointed to the committee because I made a friendship with Chief Dugan initially over having to sit down and have a difficult conversation about some things that were happening in my community in Seminole Heights. Through that, he called me and said, I want to appoint you to this committee. I understand that you're not just going to be a talking head for the benefit of the police, but you will also be even and balanced, and I tried to be that way. I also echo, Chief, that I do think that supporting the police and wanting the police to continue to grow and improve are not mutually exclusive. The two come together. So one of the things that I'm very excited to see more happening in the Tampa community right now are, so first we mentioned the Citizens Police Academy, which I did when a few years ago in Tampa. We're going to go out and continue to appoint more people to the Citizens Police Academy, young people who may or may not have otherwise been critical of the police. They'll have more experiences with the police. One of the other things that we did throughout the committee is one of the pillars is about building trust and legitimacy, and that one was a big one for me. The first one, of course, we talked about use of force. Once we got past that, we talked about building trust and legitimacy, and we talked about implicit bias and how that affects everyone, from police officers to lawyers to doctors to other sorts of professionals. And Chief Dugan told me that some of that would be flowed through the department as well. But I truly think that as a general proposition, these pillars and these chiefs that were on the committees, they truly took that feedback, and it is my strong belief that the feedback that came through the committee is already filtering through the police departments. And my hope as we continue to do this work are that the pillars, the things that we wrote for the community, will then start to bubble back up through the community, and also we see that flowing through the police.
And I'll just add on that. You saw, when you get a chance to see, there's a lot of actions that you should take. So that chief, if he or she is new, they can go through this and go, okay, this is how I'm going to start my meeting. These are the actions that I need to take. For my staff and I, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look at each one and say, okay, what action can we take? What can we add on to this? Because, again, it is a good roadmap. There's going to be some detours down the road, but, again, it'll put us right back on the same path.
Chief, I want to know, how do you measure some of the results of this? Because I'm looking at the full report, and some of the actions are just treat people with respect, listen to what they have to say. How do you actually measure the results of some of these suggestions and know that they're effective?
Well, we'll know that when we see the community relations. I'll use, again, St. Pete, we have a good community relations, but how do we make from that? Are the complaints still going down? Is the community still working with us? Are we still having an open conversation? So a lot of this is going to be the feedback we get from the community. After we have this in place for a while, it'll be good to have somebody from the outside come in because we're looking at Dr. Nelson to come and put on a workshop here, so to speak to the officers, to speak to the community, and then come up with a different action steps from there. So the feedback would be, is that community feel safe? Are we building more relationships in that community? And are people getting to the point where they, again, trust the officers more? That, you know, just because something happened in Department X, they can say, well, I know that's not happening here. And if that does happen here, Chief, how are you going to address that here?
And then also, are there costs associated with this? Do you guys have to secure additional funding to make any of these things happen?
Well, there's always costs involved when you're trying to do different things, where there's technology and other things. But the only cost of this is really your time. The law enforcement officers and the community willing to invest their time into sitting down at the table and having those tough conversations. Not when there's something going on, but right now. Having that conversation right now, so when something does happen, then we're prepared for it.